Good afternoon. I would like to share with you my findings on a paper I just wrote on Thomas Hooker and the founding of Connecticut. So as we all know, Thomas Hooker led 100 settlers from Newtown, Massachusetts to the Connecticut River Valley in 1638 to establish a new Puritan settlement. Now, my initial question was, why did they leave? Why did these families who had just traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean, why did they desire to begin again and enter a new wilderness with only 100 of them when they had the chance of greater fellowship within the Massachusetts Bay Colony? So what were the motivations? A couple things that I looked at throughout this research was, first, the worldview of the Puritans. This is something that modern scholarship tends to ignore. For example, Michael Besso, who I largely refute, he interprets Thomas Hooker and his sermons as strictly within the religious realm, that he had no intentions of discussing politics or governance. However, to chain Hooker to the pulpit like that really does a disservice to his Puritan worldview and heritage. So I looked at the Puritans as a belief system. What did they believe? How did that affect their views on church structure, governance, etc.? Then I also looked at Hooker's life. I looked at his early years in college at a Puritan Reformational church, how he fled persecution. He landed in Holland, even though the Puritan minister said, no, you're too congregational, and they kicked him out. The elders kicked him out, although the church people actually liked him. Then he finds out that his church in Essex had actually migrated to Massachusetts Bay, so he decides to join them in Boston. Now, this company became known as Mr. Hooker's Company. They really loved him as a person and as a minister. Their experiences in Massachusetts sheds a little bit of light into why the colonists left. First of all, when they come, they land in Boston, and then they're ordered by Winthrop and the General Court to move to this dilapidated, abandoned town of Newtown. It's a little bit of political rivalry and tensions. It's almost this political ploy to appease Deputy Governor Dudley. So there's some intrigue going on there. They petition for more land because they're trying to raise cattle, but there isn't enough land available. So when Hooker arrives, they share with him these struggles. He is on their side. He does not like to associate himself with magistrates. And the city of Newtown finally gets permission to leave. So they move to Connecticut. Now, note, they move to Connecticut, but they are to extend the Holy Experiment, so they are still to look to Massachusetts as their source of governance. Now, 2 years later, Thomas Hooker, he gives a sermon on May 31st, 1638, and in it he lays the principles of government, how it is to be founded on biblical principles, how God ordains government. Power comes from the people. People have the power to limit their authorities' power, etc. And then a couple months later, he actually writes a letter to Hooker, and in this letter, which is the focus of my discussion, he bombards Winthrop for abusing power. He uses Winthrop's own words against him. He says that Massachusetts is betraying Connecticut, and Hooker's response is, in his private journals and in his letter, is that, Connecticut is taking the immigrants from Massachusetts. So there's a little bit of tension there, although it's mostly behind doors. Then a couple months later, the leaders of Connecticut write the Fundamental Orders, and this establishes Connecticut as a self-governing colony under the authority of God, with limits on the governor's power that are stronger than in Massachusetts, perhaps a reflection of Winthrop's leadership. And you really see this Republican form of government that is structured through freemen electing representatives, very low voting requirements that practically all residents would meet. And so perhaps the mural that depicts Thomas Hooker leading the town of Newtown to the wilderness of Connecticut isn't as grand a misinterpretation as modern scholars may claim. Perhaps Hooker does deserve more attention and credit than modern scholarship is currently issuing him.